All right. We're coming at you live from McCormick Place. We're here at the 2024 AHR Expo in Chicagoland. And this is the John Whithouse Show.
Huh? What?
John here is Parker Sporland's technical expert on refrigerants. And you're probably actually a technical expert on multiple topics. But today we're discussing refrigerants and how regulations, retrofits, and design changes are affecting the refrigerant landscape.
Yeah,
Thank you for joining us here today.
Let's keep it to refrigerants for today.
Okay, today we're just going to stick with refrigerants. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the Sporland Video YouTube channel. You likely have noticed that a certain Jim Jansen is unfortunately not here with us. Rumor has it he created his own spin-off show called Everybody Loves Jim. It's no surprise that it has raving reviews, and it can be found on Sporland Video's YouTube Shorts. But I'll do my best to fill in today, John.
You're going to do fine. You're going to do just fine.
My name is David Thomas. I'm a product manager here at Parker Sporland. And to my right is the star of the show, John Whithouse himself. John is a senior principal engineer at Parker Sporland, and he will be the brains of this operation.
That's a big load for me to carry there, David.
Well, you got broad shoulders, so I think you can manage. This will be a interview-style webinar where I will ask several questions, and you will hopefully provide answers.
I'll do my best.
On the spot. I think you can do it. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
All right.
I'm up to the challenge. At least at this moment I am.
Okay. Well, before we get started, Parker Sporland is always here to assist you in your air conditioning and refrigeration, flow and contaminant control needs. The general phone number that you can reach Sporland headquarters at is 636-239-1111. With this phone number, you can access departments such as customer service, should you need their assistance. And for technical support, you can reach our application engineering team by calling 636-392-6306 or send an email at svdtechsupport@parker.com. All right, John, let's get started. Okay. Back in the good old days, a loaf of bread cost a quarter. Somebody pumped your gas for you. Americans were on the moon, and contractors only had 3 refrigerant tanks on the back of their service truck.
That's what they tell me, yes.
Today, it seems like we're coming out with new refrigerants every day, if not every year. Why is that?
Okay. Well, we have to go back a little ways in history to get the reasons for that. A lot of it actually dates to 1987, which was when the Montreal Protocol, which was a treaty that was signed by all United Nations members back then, over 35 years ago now, that was to phase out all ozone-depleting substances. So that first affected things like CFCs, which were the R12s and R502. That was as early as 1996, so that seems like ancient history already. And then HCFCs, most notably R22. We couldn't ship any new equipment with R22 in it after 2010. And then we couldn't import or produce any R22 for service after 2020, so 4 years ago already now. And that was all brought about in the U.S. by the Clean Air Act of 1990. The Kigali Amendment then in 2016 was an extension of the Montreal Protocol. So it was an addition where they added HFCs to the Montreal Protocol, and that dates to 2016. So that's almost 8 years ago now in itself. So it is not a phase out. It is a phase down to a baseline, and it's a phase down in production and consumption. And the Kigali Amendment, which much like the Montreal Protocol, is just an agreement among countries to do something, in this case phase down or phase out refrigerants, but it doesn't provide a mechanism to do it. So each country that's signed on to that has to implement its own mechanism to comply with that treaty. For the U.S., for the original Montreal Protocol, it was the Clean Air Act of 1990. Section 6, or you'll hear sometimes referred to as Title 6 of the Clean Air Act, deals with refrigerants. That's how the SNAP program, Significant New Alternatives program, came out. Its purpose is to phase out ozone-depleting refrigerants, such as those chlorinated refrigerants we mentioned, It also approves non-ODP replacements, and it does it by SNAP rules, which are basically notice and comment type rules. Or if it is a particularly easy one to approve, they might do it by determination of acceptability. EPA attempted to use the SNAP program to start to phase down HFCs. They did that with SNAP Rules 20 and 21, which were ultimately struck down by a federal court. And that led us to something called the AIM Act.
AIM Act. I think we're familiar with that.
I think so. We talked about it a year ago.
Right. So a year ago, we talked about it and how much it impacts our industry. Could you give us a quick recap of the AIM Act?
Yeah, absolutely. So the AIM Act itself was signed into law on December 27 of 2020. It was part of that big omnibus COVID relief bill back then. It was 44 of that bill's 5,600 some odd pages.
5,600.
Yeah. So basically a shopping cart full of bill is what that was.
Okay.
Essentially what it does is it authorizes and obligates EPA to regulate HFCs directly. It does that by a phase down for production and consumption. It regulates 18 HFC substances. Those are the same ones that are in the Kigali Amendment. There are no HFOs on that list, and the list is GWP weighted. So, for example, an HFC that is lower GWP, like R32, would be favored over a higher GWP HFC like R125. And of course, these 18 substances are the constituents of the blends that we're all familiar with, the R400 and some R500 series blends. So it really affects almost every refrigerant that we're using today. That phase down, the schedule is, we've been on a 90% of that baseline since 2022. As of the first of this year, so just 3 weeks ago, we're now at 60% of that baseline. So there's a further restriction on the HFCs that are available to us. There's another step down in 2029 to half of where we are today, 30%. And then there's 2 additional steps to get us down to 15% as of 2036. So it's a relatively quick timeline, but it's not too aggressive.
Okay.
So then we have the technology transitions. That's the second part of it.
Right.
The technology transitions are basically analogous to delisting substances under SNAP. So that's how to look at technology transitions. We were used to the idea of these delistings for the ozone depleting substances, and that's essentially what the technology transitions are going to do. The proposed rule, which was published in December of 2022, we actually talked about that here at AHR a year ago. It's very comprehensive, covers many applications, and essentially sets 3 different GWP levels. It's set a level at 700 for air conditioning, heat pumps, dehumidifiers, and chillers. If it's a refrigeration system that's below 200 pounds in charge, 300 GWP would be the limit. And then for small self-contained equipment and then some very large systems, over 200 pounds charge, the GWP limit is 150. And so in that proposed rule, there were requirements for labeling, record keeping, and reporting on a large variety of equipment. And that's where we stood a year ago on it.
Okay. Yeah, well, and I thought originally that the AIM Act was regulated by the NRA. So thank you for clearing that up. Is there anything new with respect to the AIM Act that we need to talk about?
Definitely. So, as we said, that was a proposed rule, and the final rule was published in October of this past year, October 2023. There's actually some very significant differences from the proposed rule, and subsequently, there's even been an amendment to that final rule.
So with those differences between the final and proposed rule, Was there any changes to the GWP limit?
No, actually, that's one thing that did not change. Those limits are still 150, 300, and 700 on those same equipment classes as we just discussed. But what did change significantly is the timing. In that proposed rule, the effective dates for almost everything was the 1st of 2025. There are still a few effective dates of 2025, but a lot of the equipment, the dates moved out to 2026, 2027, or even a few out to 2028. The other interesting thing that happened that was quite different from the proposed rule is that EPA defined products and systems in a somewhat different way. So a product is something that is manufactured and that is functional upon its completion of manufacture. So that could be something as simple as, say, an aerosol can. It's certainly up to something like a window unit, a window AC unit. You bring it home, plug it in, turn it on, and it works. So it's completed.
Easy enough.
But that could even extend up to some very large systems, because there are plenty of large systems, like, let's say, a very large rooftop air conditioning unit, an RTU. Those systems, you set them in place, hook up power to them, and turn them on. So they might have even defined a product as something, up to a very large system in that respect.
Sure.
But then they defined a system as, quote, an assemblage of separate components that typically are connected and charged in the field. And so that would include something like a typical U.S. residential split system,
Sure.
AC or heat pump. It would certainly include something like a supermarket system, and really any other commercial or industrial system that gets assembled in the field, assembled and charged in the field. So those are two very important definitions to remember as we go through some of this.
Got it.
Product and system.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, thanks for spelling out those differences. So what does the AIM Act Technology Transitions final rule actually restrict? And then when do these restrictions take effect?
Okay. So the first thing that it restricts is the manufacture and import of factory completed products.
Okay.
And there's a timetable for that. Like I said, some residential products do go into effect 1/1/2025. There are other products in the refrigeration sector, let's say some self-contained cases and things like that, where things go into effect as of 2026. But then there are other things that stretch out into 2027.
Okay.
It also restricts the installation of systems. And so they're defining that term installation to mean to complete a field assembled system circuit, including charging with a full charge, such that the system can function and is ready for its intended purpose. So once that system is installed, charged, and ready to run, it's considered installed. The interesting thing is there is a 3-year sell-through period on products for sale or distribution of those factory completed products. So if a product could be produced up to, let's say, 1/1/2026, that product that was produced before that point could still be sold up to 1/1/2029. So they have that 3-year sell-through period on fully manufactured products. But as it was originally released, that final rule had no sell-through on systems. So the effective date for systems was the effective date for systems.
Okay.
And a final thing that it restricts is the export of products containing HFCs. So you can't make it in the U.S. and export it to another country.
Sure. Okay.
Makes sense.
And what is not restricted under the AIM Act final ruling? Are there things that are left unregulated?
Yes, there are. The manufacture, import, sale, distribution, and export of components. So, in other words, actually a lot of the things that we manufacture, a lot of our products fall under that definition of component. They did set up the definition within the Technology Transitions Final Rule of specified component. And those specified components are one of 5 different items: an evaporator unit, a compressor, a condenser, or a condensing unit. And so for those 5 specified components, there are requirements for labeling, record keeping, and reporting. But for the other components that are not specified components, there are not even those requirements for those,
Really?
for regular non-specified components. Another thing that is not regulated by AIM or Technology Transitions Rule is used equipment or equipment in existence, which they define as being existing prior to the date that the rule was signed, 12/27/2020. It does not restrict repair and servicing of equipment. EPA has actually been very clear that they don't want to strand equipment that cannot, to where the point where it cannot be serviced. I think that was one of the reasons why they're not restricting components, because they recognize that components are required for servicing existing equipment.
Right.
And of course, they're also not regulating retrofit applications. However, they note that they are seeking information on retrofits.
Okay.
And so they are considering what they may be able to do in the space of retrofits.
Sure. Okay. GWP restrictions for residential air conditioning take effect sooner than most other applications and restrictions.
Correct.
What does the timeline look like for these residential systems, and what refrigerants are going to replace that Barbie-like canister of 410A?
Barbie pink 410A.
That's right.
Yes, indeed. Okay, so initially in the in the Technology Transitions Final Rule, there was a prohibition on the manufacture of new products, completed systems, and a prohibition on system installs as of 1/1/2025. So basically a little over 11 months from now. I mentioned a while ago an amendment already that amends this final rule. There's been an amendment that's going to allow system installs for R410A systems up to 1/1/2026. There was concern by a lot of the air conditioning OEMs that 1/1/2025 date was going to strand a lot of product in distribution channels. I think that was a very valid concern, and EPA has addressed that. The product cutoff date is still 1/1/2025, but systems can be installed. So essentially it created a 1-year sell-through, if you will, on systems for split system residential units.
Sure.
Now, you mentioned the 2 refrigerants.
Yes.
So there are 2 leaders out there, and those are both A2L safety classified refrigerants. You have R454B. That's a mix of about 69% R32 and 31% R1234YF. Its GWP is about 465, so it's a significant reduction in GWP from R410A. Has a little bit of glide, not too much to deal with in a system though. Slightly lower pressures than R410A, and that's the direction that most of the North American OEMs have decided to go for their systems. Not everyone, but most of them have. The second candidate is straight R32. Straight R32 has a GWP of 675, so it does fall under that 700 limit. It has no glide. It's a single molecule, so it has no glide. It's just very slightly higher pressure than R410A. It has been a common choice in other parts of the world, and there's one specific North American manufacturer that has decided that they're going to go down that route. So they're going to use R32 instead of R454B.
Right.
So our market that had been all one refrigerant is now going to be split, for the foreseeable future, is going to be split between 2 refrigerants.
Sure. Okay, the AIM Act will impact refrigeration. So now we're pivoting from AC to refrigeration. So it will impact refrigeration system, refrigerant usage, and even system architecture.
Yes.
What does this mean for various refrigeration applications?
Okay. Well, as we've already seen a trend The small self-contained units or standalone units in EPA's parlance, that equipment is moving towards R290 or propane. So it's a very natural progression for them. R290 is a very good refrigerant in those small units. It really does work well. Remote systems, particularly those just on condensing units that can be under 200 pounds of charge, there are some good A2L options there for them. R454A is a choice for those. There are actually some other A1 options out there too, so completely non-flammable refrigerants.
Right.
Unfortunately, right now, most of those are only really applicable to medium temp systems.
Okay.
They would not necessarily be applicable to low temp systems. But a couple of the A1 options that are out there are R471A. That's actually a sub 150 refrigerant too, by the way. It's a sub 150 A1.
Okay.
That's kind of interesting. And then there's R515B, which of course it's nice because it's an azeotrope, no glide to deal with. And it is just under that 300 GWP threshold. And looks like it should actually be a pretty good medium temp option. When we start looking at the larger commercial systems, systems that have to be able to deal with low temp applications, in those areas, CO2 is rapidly gaining ground, even in North America. There's also going to be other A2L systems out there in North America that should be able to deal with that should be able to meet the GWP limits, the 150 GWP limit.
Right.
But also perform well in low temp applications. Some of the refrigerants out there that could perform well there would be R454C, R455A, and potentially R457A as well. And then if we want to range all the way up to the industrial size systems, there's ammonia. NH3 has been the incumbent refrigerant in a lot of those industrial systems for a long time. And ammonia is going to continue to be out there, as well as CO2. We're seeing an uptick in CO2 in industrial systems as well.
Yep. Okay. Thanks for those explanations.
Mm-hmm.
So next is the phase out of HCFCs and phase down of HFCs will necessitate refrigerant retrofits in existing systems to keep them running. What does this mean for the service contractor? Okay.
The first thing I would like to point out there is please do not retrofit to a flammable refrigerant from a non-flammable system. There's no safety standard framework out there to do it. It's a bad idea. My standard 3-word reply to that is don't do it. Don't do it.
Nike wouldn't like that phrase.
Don't do it.
Okay.
Okay. Don't
do it. Got it.
All right. Right now, as of basically the 1st of 2020, 4 years ago, R22 availability is only what was stockpiled back then or that can be reclaimed.
Sure.
It is possible to effectively reclaim and reuse R22, but it's becoming more scarce and the price is going to do nothing but go up. Other HFC refrigerants like R404A, R507, and even some of the 407 blends that we've seen over the last several years is going to keep on increasing in price because, we have to remember that this AIM phase down is GWP weighted. Right. So those higher GWP constituents going into those blends, they're more favored for the phase down. They're going to go away quicker. So retrofits to these lower GWP A1s are more important right now. We've seen a lot of retrofits over the last several years from things like R22 and R404A to R448A to R449A. Those will continue, and that's still a viable retrofit. Gets the GWP down to about 1,400 in the system, so that's viable. Systems that need to be retrofitted, say an R134A system, there are also other alternatives out there too. R513A is a great retrofit from R134A. So that goes down to 600 GWP right there. That's not a bad retrofit. And we had we wrote a white paper on refrigerant retrofits back a few years ago. I think it's still very relevant. We always recommend to check sizing on all your components if you're going to do a retrofit, particularly TEVs and distributors. Very important to check sizing on them.
Sure.
And also consider the thermostatic charge that the existing TEV may have in it. A lot of these retrofit refrigerants need the R22 compatible charge. That's actually worked out to be a good thermostatic charge for a lot of them.
Okay.
And if you want to check out that white paper, it's available on our website, and it's Form 5-492.
5-492.
5-492.
Okay.
Still very relevant today, even though it's getting to be a few years old.
Sure. All right. We've also seen some states take actions restricting HFCs, since even the AIM Act didn't create any federal preemption.
Mm-hmm.
So what is going on? Could you maybe share some details at the state level?
Yeah, certainly. So as is typical on a lot of environmental matters, our friends out in California took one of the first steps.
On the left coast.
At the left coast. The California Air Resources Board has basically taken 3 major actions on refrigerants over the last few years. When the original lawsuit that threatened SNAP 20 and 21 became known, they fairly quickly adopted the provisions of SNAP 20 and 21 into their state laws. So that was sort of known as CalSNAP back then. That dates back to 2018. They've also since put their own GWP restrictions on new and existing equipment. Those GWP restrictions do look very much like the AIM Acts, very similar. But they actually also include restrictions directly on existing supermarket equipment. So existing supermarkets are actually having to retrofit down to lower GWP refrigerants in California. The most recent thing they've done is enact a ban, or upcoming bans, I should say, on the sales of higher GWP refrigerants, even for service. So, for example, I believe it's as of 1/1/2025, you'll not be able to buy any refrigerant in California above 2,500 GWP. That steps down to, I think, 1,500 as of 2030, and I think 700 or 750 as of 2033. So you're not even going to be able to buy it even for service.
Okay.
Now, another result of that lawsuit on SNAP 20 and 21 was an organization called the U.S. Climate Alliance. That actually includes about half the states in the U.S. right now. So it's about 25 members. What most of those states are doing is similar to what California did. Not even all of them are doing that, but, well, enacting SNAP 20 and 21 into state law. And with the AIM Act, it's arguable as to whether that's even necessary for them to do. Some of them are doing it, some of them aren't. I should also give mention to New York State, though. They have some very different and actually highly restrictive proposals out right now on GWP limits.
Like what?
And what's interesting about their proposal is, if you're not familiar with GWP numbers, you're probably not familiar with this, but GWP numbers are based on different time horizons. The time horizon that EPA and really the entire rest of the world uses is the 100-year time horizon. So if you hear GWP of, let's say, 675 for R32, that's on a 100-year time horizon. Okay. There's also numbers that the IPCC publishes for a 50-year time horizon and a 20-year time horizon. But the whole world uses the 100-year time horizon, with the exception of New York State.
Okay.
They want to use the 20-year time horizon, and the numbers look very different on the 20-year time horizon. The industry is still trying to figure out exactly what all that means for us.
Okay.
So New York is sort of a special case right now.
Sure.
I've been using the term they're trying to out California.
Okay.
I'll leave
Thanks
it
for
at that.
spelling that out. Yeah, even I wasn't aware of the GWP
Yeah.
time horizon difference. So that's good. Thanks, John. So the use of flammable refrigerants and very high pressure CO2, they do have lower GWPs, so that helps. But this is going to necessitate some new safety measures. Can you discuss some of the standards that affect our products and then the systems that our
Sure.
products are applied and used in?
Certainly. So most Sporlan products are actually certified under UL 207. That is basically the standard for refrigerant-containing products. In that standard, we've had products qualified under that standard for decades. It's been around a long time. It appears to continue to be the standard that's going to be used for our products going forward. Most recently, there's been a new Annex A added to that standard that creates some special requirements for flammable refrigerants. We have certified most of our products that would fall under the requirements there. We have certified most of those products, and the ones that are not completely certified there yet, we're working on them right now.
Okay.
And all the indications are very good there. You mentioned CO2 as well. There are some differences in the way products for CO2 must be tested under UL 207, more stringent requirements. And that would apply to any refrigerant actually that has a critical point under 120 degrees F. CO2's critical point is around 88 degrees Fahrenheit,
Right.
so it falls well under that. There's some additional more stringent requirements on burst and fatigue testing that we must pass to be able to certify our products for CO2 under that. So that's UL 207.
Okay.
UL 429 is another standard that some of our products fall under, mainly solenoid valves, because that is a standard for high voltage electric valves. There are some additional requirements under UL 429, but 429 has for a long time already considered use of these products with flammable fluids. So those we're basically we sort of have a head start, if you will, there on 429 products. For the system side of things, UL has been revamping some of their safety standards. UL is going to some of the IEC-based standards, so we see some UL standard numbers that don't look very familiar to us. We have UL 60335-2-40. We're actually on the 4th edition of that one. That's for air conditioning systems. That standard was published in December of 2022, and that's the standard that enables the use of A2Ls on the UL side for air conditioning systems.
Okay.
So it does have requirements in there for leak detection and 8 different A2L safety mitigation measures for air conditioning systems. On the refrigeration side, there's UL 60335-2-89. The current edition of that standard is the 2nd edition, and it was published in October of 2021. There's a 3rd edition that's targeted for September of 2024. And between the 2nd edition, current edition, and 3rd edition, basically that is enabling larger charges of A3s like propane, 300 grams of propane in a closed case, 500 grams in an open type case. And it's also enabling significantly larger charges of A2L refrigerants up to about 200 pounds of an A2L.
Okay.
And it's doing it via the concept of releasable charge. So it's basically setting a framework to use safety shutoff valves to isolate different parts of the system so that you could never contain more than that releasable charge in any part of the system should a leak be detected in a certain area of the system. So that's basically how it works. And I also have to mention ASHRAE safety standards. We're here at AHR and ASHRAE standards. We have ASHRAE meetings going on along with the conference, or an ASHRAE conference going along with the expo here.
Right.
I'll get it out eventually. And so we have AHR 15 for systems in general. And then we have a newer AHR 15.2 that's a safety standard that's aimed at residential type systems. And so I have to mention those as well. Those are also enabling the use of A2L and other flammable refrigerants.
Understood. Okay. Seems like new CO2 R744 applications are being introduced all the time, John.
They are.
I mean, we're here, we see CO2 left and right.
Absolutely.
Almost everywhere we look. So where are we with this situation of CO2, and where are we planning on getting all that needed CO2?
Okay. So indeed, you're right. There's more CO2 systems being introduced every day. There are a few installations out there now that are pulling CO2 directly out of the atmosphere. But I think
sounds like a good idea.
It does sound like a good idea, but I think we all know that the vast majority of CO2 is still manufactured as an industrial process.
Right.
Essentially, what they're doing is burning natural gas. That separates off the hydrogen. They use the hydrogen for ammonia production, and then harvest the CO2 directly to use for different CO2 applications. There are other processes out there that you hear sometimes. You hear about various processes that use limestone, and that does exist, but those are mainly low production laboratory type processes. But with, I will mention this too, with CO2, especially for refrigeration system use, the purity of that CO2 is very important, just as the purity of all refrigerants is important,
Right.
because of the function of the refrigeration system. So you can't necessarily just use any old CO2 in a system. It's very important to keep in mind. Most system manufacturers recommend a grade called Coleman grade, or better known as instrument grade CO2, which is essentially a 99.99% pure CO2 that has less than 10 ppm water content in it. And that very low water content is extremely important in a CO2 system. Many different locations in the system where moisture could be a very bad thing, cause freeze ups, and all sorts of operational difficulties within the system. Yep. So in the temperatures and pressures that a CO2 system runs, it's going to form ice somewhere if there's water in there, and that ice is going to cause problems. So we do not want that. Clean, dry CO2 if we're going to use it.
Use a Sporlan filter dryer.
That's right.
Use our catch-all.
That's right.
So let's pivot to other refrigerants like hydrocarbons and A2Ls in general.
Mm-hmm.
What are we doing with those refrigerants, and then how flammable is this stuff anyway?
So AHR 34 is the standard, and the standards committee that determines the designation of the refrigerant, so the R number, but also the toxicity and flammability classification of refrigerants. So that group is actually meeting this evening here in Chicago.
Fair enough.
So they always meet Monday evening of the AHRA convention, AHRA conference.
Okay. So
on the toxicity side, if it has an A rating, so most of the refrigerants that we deal with have an A rating. It means it's less toxic. A B rating means it's more toxic, and that's based on a threshold on the occupational exposure limit, which is actually typically determined by NIOSH, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health. So every substance basically has a occupational exposure limit, and there's a threshold below which it gets rated a B, above which it gets rated an A.
Sure.
So that's the toxicity. That's the basis of toxicity.
Pretty black and white.
Right. Now, flammability is a little different.
Okay.
You actually have 4 different ratings for flammability right now. You have a 1, which is non-flammable, or actually that means it will not sustain a flame on its own. It could be burned if it's sprayed into a fire, but it will not maintain a flame on its own. You have 2L, which is the one that we hear the most about today, definitely of the greatest interest, which means it's mildly flammable with a low burn rate.
Okay.
It takes a lot of energy to ignite it, and much less energy is released if it is ignited. If it is ignited, it does create some byproducts we have to be very careful of. So things like HF is still a byproduct,
Okay.
but that is true of an A1 if it's in a fire. So if you have R1, let's say R134A, and it gets, in a fire, it will make HF as well. So
Okay.
that's it's a concern, but it's not really that much greater a concern than it is with an A1.
Sure.
There is also the 2 flammability rating, which is a higher flammability rating, but there's actually very few refrigerants that fall into a straight 2 flammability rating category. Not really worth much of our time today.
Sure.
And then, of course, we have the 3 flammability rating. So a 3 would be something like propane. That's highly flammable. It's a fuel. It's basically a fuel gas. Propane, propylene, those are all 3 rated. Most hydrocarbons, all hydrocarbons, I think, are rated 3.
Okay.
So it takes very little energy to ignite them. In other words, a very small spark or heat source can ignite them. And as we all are probably aware, they release a lot of energy when they burn.
Right.
So
Okay.
for that reason, they're still subject to those pretty small charges. Even half a kilogram, as we talked about a while ago, is still a fairly significant charge if you get it all in one space.
Sure.
With with something like propane.
Okay. Very good. Thanks for explaining that, John.
Certainly.
So maybe there's a need for continued contractor and technician training for both A2L and CO2 applications.
I think
I
think you're absolutely right about that,
You
David.
think? Good.
I think so.
So you think there's a need?
I believe. I think
Okay.
there's definitely a need.
And where can people get trained?
All right. So Sporlan, of course, we offer a bunch of different webinars. Our friend that we mentioned earlier, Jim Jansen, he has a whole bunch of different content out there. I've participated in some of that with him, not all of it, but some of it. So there's webinars out there. You can find those on our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
I think you can link directly to them from our page on Parker.com. And we also offer in-person live training specialist classes.
Right.
And that's something that Jim does a lot of himself. I help him out there. All the product managers, such as you come in and do stuff for the specialist classes as well. Those can be arranged. We like doing those. We'll host you there in Washington, Missouri. We get great feedback on those classes because
we sure do.
We really do. We pack a lot of information in there, and we make it worth your money when we do that.
No doubt.
So I really do think highly of those classes.
Yeah, they're well done, and again, mainly run by Jim Jansen. So that's why they're so well done.
Mainly.
All right, I think we're coming to an end here, John.
I think so.
Here's my last question for you.
Okay. All right.
Hopefully, Parker Sporlan has flow and contaminant control products that are intended for these uses of the new refrigerants that
Absolutely.
are coming out. Could you enlighten us on a couple of those products? I know that maybe we should start with the GCM valve.
Right. GCM valve is a great place to start. We've had our GC and FGB gas cooler valve lines out for CO2 applications. Those have been out for a few years now. We have a new, lower cost, highly flexible, small capacity CO2 valve line coming out, the GCM line.
Right.
As you just talked about it.
Right.
I think we're only weeks or a couple of months away from introduction of that line.
Yep.
If you're around the AHR Expo here, we have a sample you can look at.
Yes, we do.
And that is the M stands for multi-purpose on that. So It is applicable to gas cooler applications, flash gas bypass, and even direct CO2 expansion applications. So it's engineered and designed. It's a very robust valve. It's engineered and designed to cover a lot of different applications within the CO2 system.
Great. And I believe the pressure rating is 140 bar?
Yes, 140 bar.
Okay.
Yep.
How about contaminant controls?
Contaminant controls. So we've been doing a lot of work on our contaminant controls product lines. Right now we have new contaminant controls products for CO2 systems being introduced over the next few weeks to few months. We have uh, regular catch-all type products. We have the replaceable core catch-alls under development for CO2, high pressure products there. And we're also covering the oil filter side as well.
Right.
So for CO2 systems with oil filters, so high pressure, replaceable core and non-replaceable core oil filters for CO2 as well.
Great. Okay. And then the last one is A2L shutoff valves. Could you tell us a little bit about those?
Right. So we mentioned shutoff valves earlier, and we are in process of introducing both solenoid type and check valve type shutoff valves for A2Ls as we speak. Those products have been in development for a little while now.
Right.
We're going through compliance testing. Also mentioned some of those different compliance issues that we have to go through on those. There are some specific requirements within the UL 60335-2-89 standard that we have to follow for those products.
Right.
And so those are actually being evaluated under those standards right now. But we have those products coming out and over a pretty large range of sizes as well to suit A2L applications coming up.
Okay.
We're going to be able to support the companies that want to do, that want to follow the releasable charge framework, 2-89. So if you want an A2L system that has a higher total system charge, that's what those products are aimed at.
Protecting that indoor space, right?
Yeah. Right, exactly.
Okay. Very good. Well, I think that is really getting us to a wrap here. So I just want to remind the audience that you can contact our technical support at 636-392-3906 or send an email at svdtechsupport@parker.com. You can send us any follow-up questions. We can even filter those out and probably send it to John or myself so that we can give them answers to any questions that they might have.
Let's send them to Jim instead.
Okay, well, I like that idea. Let's send them straight to Jim Jansen. All right. And then we also will have this recording on the Sporlin Video YouTube channel.
Yes, we will.
And I think that's it.
That's it.
I think that's a wrap.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thanks, everybody.